All right, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm really excited that everyone can join us. I'm really excited for anybody that's watching. I think this is going to be a great discussion. Many of you know me. My name is Pavan Parikh, and I am the Democratic nominee for Hamilton County Probate Court Judge. I'm joined tonight with two friends of mine, one who used to actually be my boss, Eric Kearney, and Charlie Luken, who is the former mayor of Cincinnati and former United States representative from this area. And I want you all to get the perspective of people that have been engaged in state and federal government, that I've worked with, that are community and civic leaders, and try to understand a little bit about what's going on in our country. What's the state of our country? What's the state of our county, our city, and how does the courts tie into it? Because I think one thing that when we look at the national news and we look at whatever's going on in the world, it feels like there's a lot going on legislatively or from the executive branch of government, but how do the courts kind of play into this? How are the courts part of just our daily lives? And specifically, because we're lucky to be joined by Eric Kearney, who focused a lot on adoption issues, for example, while he was at the state Senate, and Charlie Luken, who ran for probate court 4 years ago. How does the probate court really fit into our community and what we want our community to be? So, again, my name is Pavan Parikh, for those of you that don't know me. I'm a born and raised Cincinnati kid, attended Xavier University, the St. Louis University College of Law. I have worked, I clerked at a prosecutor's office. I had my own practice. I worked for Judge Nadine Allen for a period of time. I spent 4 years at the state Senate as the chief legal counsel for the Ohio Senate Democratic Caucus. And for the last 5 years, I've worked in-house with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Cincinnati, which is a $100 billion financial institution. Since I moved back to Cincinnati, I've had the distinct honor and pleasure of being able to teach. I've taught at Xavier University in the political science department, and I've taught at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, a course on election law. But one of the jobs that I'm the most proud of is for the last 7 years, I've been a judge advocate in the Army Reserve. And my experience in the Army has been twofold. One is in serving soldiers who have been hurt in the worst possible way. I've served as a special victims counselor where I've represented victims of military sexual assault. But throughout all 7 years, I've also worked with soldiers who were getting ready to deploy to war. And I've had to sit down with them and work through with them, what is their estate plan going to look like? What do they want their will to be? How are they going to write their financial power of attorney, their healthcare power of attorney, their living will? These incredibly important documents, many of which form the basis of what brings somebody in front of the probate court. So I'm very excited to be having this discussion tonight. I'm going to just start off by letting you know a little bit about Charlie and Eric. For those of you who don't know, Charlie Luken is a graduate of Notre Dame and received his law degree from the University of Cincinnati College of Law in 1976. He started practicing law and then served as Cincinnati City Council from 1981 to 84 before becoming mayor. Charlie served as mayor of Cincinnati from 1984 to 1990, at which point his father was a United States Congressman and decided to retire. And Charlie won an election and represented our region in the United States Congress in 91 and 92. When he returned to Cincinnati, he served as a news anchor at WLWT from 93 to 99, and then returned back to government service as mayor, the first strong mayor of the city of Cincinnati in 1999. And then in 2005, decided not to run for mayor again. He currently works for the law firm of Calfee, Halter, and Griswold and is the chairman of the Cincinnati Port Authority. And we're very excited to have him. But to tie Charlie's life and Eric's life together, when Charlie didn't run for mayor again after 2004, Mark Mallory, who was then a state senator, won that seat. And as Mark Mallory left his seat at the state Senate, in 2005, Eric Kearney was appointed to fill the vacancy in that seat. Eric's also a Cincinnati kid, grew up and attended St. Xavier High School and attended Dartmouth College and received his law degree also from the University of Cincinnati College of Law. He's had a career in law, business, and politics. He was a state senator from 2005 to 2015, during which time he also served as the Ohio Senate Minority Leader, and he has championed a number of causes, including adoption, children's health, small business development, and pension reform. On a national level, Eric was a member of President Barack Obama's National Finance Committee when he ran for U.S. Senate and President. He has been a leader in Ohio's legal community and is managing partner of Kearney and Kearney LPA. In addition to politics and law, Eric has been a leader in the business community. He founded and built one of the largest African-American owned publishing companies, Sesh Communications, and he currently serves as president and CEO of the Greater Cincinnati African-American Chamber of Commerce. So, with all that said, that's a lot of history. That's a lot of experience that you guys have, both at locally and at the highest levels of state and federal government. So what I want to start our conversation on is I kind of want to work backwards. I want to start at the national level and work our way down to our local issues and what really is important in the city of Cincinnati. But overlying all of that, I just wanted to get your perspectives on leadership. You guys have both been leaders at the highest levels of government. So from your perspective, and I think we'll start with Charlie first, you know, what would be your philosophy of leadership? What do you think are the most important qualities a leader should have, and who or what really influenced you and that background?
Well, thanks, Pavan, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And Eric and I go back longer than either one of us want to acknowledge, probably, but we've been friends over the years, and it's an honor to be with him tonight. As you mentioned, Pavan, I got started, and I also want to emphasize, underscore, we're here tonight for you. And we are here tonight to promote and help your campaign for the probate court in Hamilton County, which we're going to talk about probably in a little bit. But I also want to mention to our audience at the top that running for any office, and particularly judge, is difficult for several reasons. But it's one of them is it's hard to raise the resources and get the attention that you need to run a good campaign. So if you go on your website and want to help Pavan, that's why we're here tonight, and I encourage you to do that. Anyway, as you mentioned, I got started kind of relatively young. I think I was mayor when I was 33 or 4 or something. And in those days, I think you form your leadership style from the people you surround yourself with at the early age. And, you know, city council was a much different animal in those times. But when you ask what I think are the needed characteristics for leadership, particularly at the local level, I would say consensus building and having the ability to bring people together to get things done in the best interest without demagoguery, which unfortunately we see much too often, particularly from our leaders in DC. So, you know, I'm kind of a retail politics guy in the sense that, you know, I don't think I've ever been accused of having high ideas, but maybe somewhere along the line have been helpful in bringing people together to get things done for the benefit of our community. And that's kind of simply how I approach it. It's been a while for me. And I'll turn it over to my friend Eric. And as I said, Eric and I have been, if you go online on Facebook on Eric's page, you may still have that ridiculous picture of he and I from God knows when, but that gives you an indication of how far back together we go. And Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I have to say, Charlie is one of the great public servants that we've had in this area, and is really a fantastic person. And I love his sense of humor. So on a personal level, for those who know Charlie, that's really one of your great attributes. And it's been wonderful to kind of share public service with you. We've never had the opportunity to ever serve in a body together, but certainly, you know, I mean, I cherish our friendship. I really do.
And I do too.
Yeah, Pavan, I have to say, this may sound a little bit odd, but I'm really proud of you and really kind of thinking about the trajectory of your career from when you were general counsel in the Ohio Senate Democratic Caucus to where you are now, and all of the things that you've done, including your military service and your work on the law and your work at the Federal Home Loan Bank is just, it's just amazing to me. And so I wish you all of God's blessings, and I really believe that the sky is your floor, and that you're going to really do great things, not only here in Hamilton County, but also throughout the state and our country.
Well, thank you, but I think you're asking me to try to go for a promotion long before I've even gotten out the door. But I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, you got to think big. You always have to think big. So to answer your question about leadership, I think kind of along the lines of what Charlie just outlined, I think great leaders are great listeners. And so you have to listen to what the community is saying, what your colleagues, if you happen to be in a legislative branch, or if you're leading a community group, or if you're leading a church group, or whatever it might be. And I think that great leaders have to also be students, meaning you have to put in the work to learn about issues and to learn about what's important. And that doesn't always come naturally, because some people, present company excluded, think that they know everything already, right? And so you've got to put in the time to read and to research and to really find out what's important. So those are two key characteristics, I would say, of leaders: great listeners and those who are willing to learn.
So I'll make you praise somebody and throw somebody under the bus. So if you would say on a national level, who do you think would be a great example of a leader currently, and who do you think would be, let's just say, a not so great example of a leader?
Well, the not so great's pretty easy. It begins with a T and ends with a P. I mean, I think you could fill in the middle three letters, but I think we've reached a point in our democracy where, I don't want to overstate this, but I do think that there are some very fundamental democratic principles that are at risk. And that sounds like demagoguery, I guess, but when I see the things that are going on and the way they're going on, I really do kind of fear for our country in a very real way that I don't think I have any time in my life. I did have the opportunity to serve very briefly with Nancy Pelosi, and I've seen her a few times since then. And when you talk about somebody who I think has not only political skills but intellect, and she walks a fine line sometimes, but I think she does it with skill and dignity, and I would highlight her service in DC.
Well, I would pick Barack Obama as somebody. I mean, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody who knows me. But I think that his approach was very studious. I think there's a big contrast if you look at President Obama's approach as opposed to the current occupant of the White House. There's a big contrast there. So I think that his intellect, his approach, his openness to ideas and to, frankly, saving the automobile industry and trying new approaches there, and saving the financial industry and trying new approaches there, are just some of the examples of what made President Obama great, not to mention the Affordable Care Act. So he would be someone that I would cite on a national level. And not to be partisan, I would say that Governor DeWine, who has kind of leading us through this COVID crisis, has been open to ideas and has tried to listen to health professionals and done things very well. So I think there are people on both sides of the aisle that have done great things, and so I would.
And Eric, I would add, in light of his recent passing, every once in a while you run into somebody in politics who, it's like the old Merrill Lynch commercial, when they speak, you listen. Mm-hmm. And John Lewis had that ability that was just crazy. I mean, this was a relatively diminutive guy, and he didn't say a whole lot, and oftentimes he was quiet about it. He obviously had a church background, but the guy could just kind of make you do what he wanted just by the force of I don't know what it was about his person, but it just really, every time I was in his presence, I thought, I'm in the presence of somebody really better than I am. I mean, he just gave me that aura. If you spend any time with him, I'm sure you know what I mean.
I met him once, and I think you're 100% right, Charlie. I mean, he's not exactly a tall man, but his presence, his gravitas, filled up every last square inch of any room that he was in. And even just like the one time I got to spend a little bit of time with him, I mean, the room was just dead silent. Everybody was just 100% focused on everything he was saying and hanging on every last word. Yeah, he was really, really somebody special. And I think what's concerning for a lot of people is as we get further and further away from the 60s and the great leaders of that time are less and less, I think there's a risk of people assuming two things. One, that where we are today was inevitable. And two, just forgetting what the actual struggle was. The idea that, it was a completely peaceful movement, that there weren't riots, that there wasn't some level of looting, that's just not accurate. And that there was violence, and a lot of it was reactionary because violence was being perpetrated upon the peaceful protesters. But this idea that it was inevitable that we ended up where we end up today, that you could have a black president, that that the Civil Rights Act of '64 actually does happen, that wasn't guaranteed. And I think that's a risk that we face, like you said, Charlie, kind of in our current environment where the rule of law seems to be under attack. America is not guaranteed. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. Us being what we have been over time, it's not guaranteed. And if we're not taken to the streets or to the courts and fighting for it every single day, it may not be here tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a wonderful reminder that we have to refresh ourselves and think in this democracy what is important to us. And those freedoms like freedom of association, the First Amendment rights, the importance of the media and the press, and why those institutions and why we do certain things a certain way are important. And perhaps looking on the positive side, the current administration is just a reminder to those of us who have a different perspective that we really have to continue to fight for these First Amendment rights amongst the other rights and the other things that are truly important to us.
Well, so moving then in that direction, let's talk about a little bit of what's going on the federal level. I know you mentioned, Eric, a little bit about Governor DeWine, and how he has responded to the coronavirus, the COVID pandemic. On a national level, what are your thoughts on how do we come out of this? Where do we go? How is this going to end? I mean, what does the future kind of look like on a national level? Try to the extent you can, try to take the election out of it. But just as a people, as a country of people, how do we come out of this?
Well, I think for me, and actually, I don't want to jump in if you wanted to get in here.
No, go.
I just think I'm optimistic that we as a country will come together and be closer together. So my hope is that after we kind of solve the COVID thing, that we'll understand that we have to help each other, that we've got people in need in our communities, people are losing their jobs, and we've got to figure out a way to help them. People aren't eating, so if you talk to the people at the Free Store Food Bank, my gosh, I mean, there are tons of people who are in need. And then we've got to think about how we interact with each other. And maybe this is a way that we can do that a little bit better. So I'm optimistic that that our higher principles will prevail, and that our best senses of ourselves will prevail. And so that's what I would like to concentrate on.
And I certainly hope you're right, Eric. I'm just going to mention one part of the national scene that I think is at the origin of some of my my hesitation about optimism, and that is that, you know, several years ago, redistricting and gerrymandering became the rule. And I think I talked to a congressman who I have a lot of respect for on the other side, and his comment to me was that he does not worry about the Democrat in the election. He worries about the primary every time he makes a vote. And that's a, when you go in, when you go in your legislative body as a senator, a congressman in the state house or anywhere, and you're worried about getting hit from your own side and feel the need to go even farther and farther and farther than your senses would take you normally. I mean, that's the polarization that concerns me. And I've had this conversation with John Boehner, who got elected the same year I did. And I said, John, you guys did this when you started cutting up these districts that kind of took the middle out of things. Mm-hmm. So, and you were there for some of that.
Yeah. So what do you think about the legislative process? Because if you think about the legislative process, it's all built around compromise. And people, that's a bad word, right? On the extreme left and on the extreme right. And so people say, no, don't compromise, don't compromise. There's a certain congressman in Ohio who I served with in the Ohio Senate who is known for not compromising. And that's Jim Jordan. And so I just wonder, what are your thoughts about that, Charlie, about like the lack of compromise, the lack of, hey, let's work something out for the greater good?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think, Eric, that you and I probably come from a time when compromise, I mean, you're a lot younger than I am, but we come from a time when compromise was a little more achievable than it is today. I mean, you really do put your political career. I don't think, for example, I don't think John Boehner makes any bones about the fact that one of the things that drove him out of Washington was he kept getting slammed from his own people. Right. I mean, it wasn't the Democrats that were driving him nuts. He expected that, but he was getting slammed all day by his own people, and eventually that just wears you out. Which is one of the reasons, on a personal level, as Pavan noted, I did not run for re-election, and Eric will remember I didn't have an opponent for Congress in 1992, and the reason I didn't was I came from city council and mayor's office where, if you moved a bus stop or you passed the law and then you went on to the next thing. But in DC, it struck me that it was all just posturing, and I just didn't enjoy the experience.
Uh-huh.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point on the redistricting and the gerrymandering. And when Eric and I were at the Senate, we went through that process of redistricting. And then we were both there long enough when I was sitting there as his lawyer that they wanted to actually do reform, because it got so bad that even the Senate Republicans, it seemed like, were thinking, I would rather try to negotiate with a moderate Democrat than a far-right Republican. And so we are willing to maybe make some concessions to bring some type of reform in there. And I think we were up to what, 4 o'clock that one morning voting on that that vote.
Crazy.
To try to just get something done to try to take a little bit of this out, because even from the majority side, it seemed like it was impossible for them to even run their own caucus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things were not good then. And, we're supposed to have, starting in 2022, new districts for the state of Ohio. We'll see how that pans out.
Well, I think one of the interesting thing with how that reform and that constitutional amendment was structured is I'm always going to try to bring this conversation some way, somehow back to the importance of the bench, but it really underscores, for example, the Supreme Court races in Ohio this year. The Supreme Court would have original jurisdiction over any claims under that constitutional section. So if you were looking at a Supreme Court that is more balanced, at the Ohio Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court has already said this last year that any of these issues are going to be litigated at the state Supreme Courts. We don't want to touch anything around partisan gerrymandering. So if these are going to be dealt with by the state Supreme Courts, then you need to make sure that your state Supreme Courts are balanced as well. Because otherwise, it's not going to provide an effective check and balance over the actions of the legislatures, which I think all of us have seen over the years in Ohio.
So the difficult thing about the statewide elections for, let's say, Supreme Court is you know, they're very partisan, and if one party's on a roll, as the Republican Party has been with statewide elections, that kind of tips the balance in their favor. And there aren't districts, for instance, for the Supreme Court, which is unfortunate. Here in Hamilton County, I think, though, we have an opportunity to have a great impact on, for instance, your election, because you know, you can go out and touch people, and you can go door to door. I know you're not supposed to. You're supposed to social distance, but at any rate, you've got to interact with. You have an opportunity to interact with people, and citizens have more of a connection with their local judge than they would with the Supreme Court.
And it's very difficult to get people to. You know, it's hard enough to follow politics through your president and your congressman and your council. Unfortunately, because of the canons of ethics and other things, Pavan, you're running on the quality of your character and your integrity and your intellect and issues like that. And I don't want to overlook that we're here tonight to support you. And I looked over my shoulder at the time just to make sure we got time to talk about that, to talk about your race and to emphasize to people, because I do think that if people look at the candidates in your race and on down the ticket, you'll see that we've got some very good people running for judicial positions this year. I think they're doing a better job of holding the team together, and if we can get people to vote down the ticket, I think results could be. I mean, and Eric will remember this. He was only a little boy, but you know, I can remember when the Supreme Court, if your name was O'Neill or Brown, you got elected. So that's what kind of thought went into electing judges. So
I mean, Charlie, that was the case 10 years ago, so it didn't have to be that young.
Well, I think we've seen some different results than we ever thought we would in Hamilton County. And I think that if people analyze races, and particularly your race, you will do very well.
Well, so before we move down to the county level, I just want to do one question kind of at the state level, 1.5 questions, let's say. You know, one of the things that I'm very proud about as far as my personal record is that in the 4 years I was at the state Senate, I believe we were the only caucus that did not have a major ethical issue. I think somebody else from all 3 other caucuses had to either resign or was arrested on ethics issues, and we did not have that. And part of my job was to ensure that we did not have those problems. And so this one's going to kind of go to you, Eric, but Householder. For people that aren't aware, the now former Speaker of the House was arrested and indicted on bribery charges. And you used to be in leadership in the Senate. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think we can't talk about anything statewide without at least addressing it. From your experience at the State House, your time over there, your just general thoughts on the culture at the State House, on what has generally been alleged. I can't really talk about it, but I'll let you handle a little bit of that.
Yeah, so, I guess the U.S. District Attorney and the FBI are investigating former Speaker Householder and saying that he, through a series of political action committees and corporations, received money from First Energy and used that money to influence legislation and pass a piece of legislation, and took some of that money for his own personal use. So I can say that when I was at the State House, I didn't know any lobbyists who were doling out checks like that or doing anything along those lines. So I think that there's an issue about how you trust, or can you trust, state officials to do the right thing when they have a great deal of power and discretion in their hands. Who knows what will happen? He's fighting the case, but just from what has been revealed in the media and by the U.S. Attorney's Office, it appears pretty much like there's overwhelming evidence against him. But the ethics, and one thing I got to thank you for, is you made sure all our reports were right, that we answered all the questions, that they were very thorough. And so appreciate your thoroughness and your attention to detail there.
Well, both of our butts were on the line if I got that one wrong. So I wanted to make sure that we were all taken care of at that point.
Yeah, and Pavan, I don't think the Republicans are the only people that have a history of corruption in their party on occasion. But I would observe that sometimes the old expression, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, I think when one party dominates for an extended period of time, and I mean, we've seen it unfortunately on our side of the fence in places like Illinois. So, you know, in Ohio, it's been kind of one-sided for quite a while, and I'm not making any conclusions about the Householder case because it'll go to trial, and we're all lawyers here, although I would admit I'm not a good one, but it has been one-party rule overwhelmingly, and I don't know if over decades and decades that's healthy.
Right. So the Ohio Senate since 1985 has been ruled by the Republicans. So think about that, 35 years.
Well, and that comes down to when you look at centers of power. And I think you're right, Charlie. You look at other parts around the state, even potentially around here, and history. It's not limited to one party. And I'm not alleging that anybody is specifically corrupt or anything. But when you talk about the idea of one group of people being in charge for so long, you can't really innovate. You can't really bring in new ideas. You can't really think about new ways to do business. Sometimes transparency starts to disappear. Accessibility starts to disappear. And that's one of the things that we've seen at our courthouse, that the same group of people have been in charge forever. I mean, to the best that I can tell, there's never been Democratic control of the Hamilton County Courthouse. There's never been a Democratic probate court judge, for example. And so the bringing in new ideas, bringing in new people, thinking of more efficient ways to do business, that just hasn't been a priority. And I think that's one of the things that's at stake in this election. I think that's why I'm proud to be on a slate that is challenging every single race. There are 13 local judicial races, and we're challenging every single one. And almost to the person, part of our platform is we want more transparency. We want more accessibility. We need data so we can understand on the criminal side, if you're running for Common Pleas General Division, are there implicit biases that are manifesting themselves in sentencing? From my perspective, that same question appears in adoptions. That same question appears in involuntary commitments for mental health issues. Are there problems here that we're not seeing? But we won't know until we can collect the data. So that kind of shifts us briefly into the idea of like a countywide issues. You know, just generally talking about the shift the county has been in since Charlie first won elective office through to now when I'm trying to win elective office. Hamilton County looks very different electorally, demographically than it did. You two have both been around for a long time working in this community. Sorry, Charlie. You know I did the office before I was born, man. So
I'm only smiling because I hate being the historian, but that's the role that I think I've become in my life. But I want to stop you for 1 second because I think you said something very important, and it may be a little esoteric to people, but take the probate court. You mentioned mental health, adoption, 2 examples. When something is done the same way over decades, it is very hard to innovate, create fresh ideas, look around the country. And when I ran for the probate court, I was literally astounded at the level of what I would call is just the number one criteria to work there seemed to be the old Republican courthouse cronyism. Now, I haven't looked at it for a while, but I can tell you that it is what you said, Pavan, about change sometimes giving people a new perspective, a different perspective, a broader perspective And that's very much something that people should think about in the probate court, because those issues you mentioned, adoption, mental health, I mean, those are very important to people, and being creative and thoughtful and thinking of new ways to do things is important.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. I mean, I've only practiced very limited times and very few times in probate court, but as you mentioned earlier, adoption is something that's very important to me. It's very important to our family. We adopted one of our children, and a lot of our close friends have adopted children. And so that process and sensitivity to that process and making sure that it goes smoothly is something that is very important. And the mental health issues, which we're learning more and more about, it seems like every day there's a story or an article about it. Those are all very important. I think it's really wonderful, Pavan, that you are joining with the other candidates that are running for judge in Hamilton County, and you guys are kind of working together. I think it's beautiful. I was out registering voters on Saturday, and every judicial candidate came by with his or her sign, and it was wonderful to see. And so that kind of momentum, coupled with people making financial contributions to your campaign, I think will really bode well for you and for others this November.
Well, thank you. And I really do appreciate that, because I think both of you can remember a time where we couldn't beg people to run for judge around here. I mean, I remember getting a call pretty soon after I graduated law school, moved back to Ohio, asking, hey, how many years have you been practicing? Because we desperately need judicial candidates. And then this time around, there were so many people that applied to get the endorsement of the party and applied to run that we had to turn people away. And I think that really is demonstrative of the shift that is happening in our community. So on that note, though, like, how do you, when we talk about the future, Eric, you said you were hopeful towards the future. Charlie, you said you were a little more, I wouldn't say pessimistic, but holding your cards a little bit closer to your chest on that one. Let's just say concerned. But
yeah.
locally, our county's changing. What do you think? What do you think the influence is going to be on our local politics, on our local governance, as we're going forward, as we're entering into this new era where it looks like the Democratic nominee for president is going to win Hamilton County here on out? That just seems to be what the trend lines have started to look like, and that is going to impact all of our local races. What do you think that means for just how government is run in Hamilton County?
Well, I'm optimistic because we've got 3 Democratic members of the Hamilton County Commission, and as you say, the trends are going in the direction of the Democratic Party, which I'm happy to see. But I don't want us to take it for granted. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got to get people out to the polls. We've got to make sure that people are registered to vote and that people are educated about voting, and that there's complete participation and information, and a word that you used earlier, which is so important, and that is transparency. And so we as Democrats have to work hard to get our people elected, and then once in office or once on the bench, we've got to really produce and really work for the people.
And I think that accountability is a part that I am even looking forward to as a candidate, and should I win, because I just think it's so important to have a level of accountability to the taxpayers, to the citizens, to ensure that we are all getting what we're paying for in our government. And I think that now that it seems to be that nobody's getting a free pass in office anymore, that is hopefully a positive development for our community.
Yeah, and Pavan, I would say that even though Hamilton County trends blue, which it definitely is doing, there's no question about that. But it's not so insurmountable that if the county commission, for example, if they don't first and foremost think about serving the best interests of the public, it could switch. I mean, we just talked about what happened with Republicans in the State House for decades and decades. So I think Democrats have now that they've got the power, accept the responsibility.
Well,
Right.
and I think one thing that will be interesting is, we've started to see it that there's still some city county fights happening. But looking at just the fact that the city and the county are trying to work more closely together to achieve, the best possible ends. One of the things that popped up about 2 months ago was a decision by the Parks Board to potentially place a tax levy on the November ballot. And one thing that I think a lot of us learned at that time was that the entirety of the Parks Board is appointed by the Probate Court judge. And I don't think a lot of people knew that. And I think if you look at the history of it, it's been this way for over 100 years, and nobody particularly knows why. But it is what it is. And I have taken the position that I don't think that a judge should have this kind of appointment authority to begin with. I think it's an executive authority, it's potentially a legislative authority, and that the judiciary should be taken out of this process altogether. But that if a judge is going to have that authority, then there needs to be radical transparency in the application process. There needs to be radical transparency in the decision-making process, because there's too much of a risk of even just an appearance of impropriety. And I think that is something that we got to very much guard against. Charlie, I know you have thoughts. So I'm curious.
Well, look, I think you've hit on my thought, which is this is the antithesis of transparency. This is a group of people who are appointed by the probate judge, whose primary qualification is being a card-carrying and often big donor Republican. I mean, that's just the fact. And I think we have to move away from that era, and that was an era. And okay, for better or worse, but we're now in a different, better time. And to have people that meet kind of quietly and tell somebody they're going to raise their property tax by 250% or something, I objected to it 6 years ago, and I objected to it a few weeks ago, as you may have seen. And if the probate judge is going to do it, that's fine. But let's at least open up the process. Let's at least let people understand what the process is. Let's at least have members of this board that's primary qualification is not being a card-carrying rich Republican. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's kind of where I came out after looking at it carefully. And I think you've hit on the word. The word is transparency. And I think, again, we talked about doing something the same way over and over again for decades gives you this result. And that's why I think somebody like you would be a refreshing change in that position.
Well, and I think, I love the parks. I'm a huge fan of the parks. I think they're a great service. Well, this is nothing against.
Hey, Pavan, I hope I don't come off as anti-park. But people don't. One thing people don't know is that these city parks that they enjoy, Smale, Alt, whatever, Mount Echo, that's not part of this system. No. People don't know that. They think it's all the same.
You're right. And I think that, that we have these parks. We have an amazing city park system. We have an amazing county park system. But again, it's a question of, for me, accountability of leadership. It's not about the fact that I don't like the parks. I love the parks. But I'm concerned when there is accountability issues for leadership. I'm concerned when you look at the Parks Board, like you said, when you look at the qualifications of somebody, it's one of the largest landowners in the county. It's one of the most important environmental assets in the county. What are we doing to ensure someone with an environmental background is sitting on that board? They have the authority to put a tax levy on the ballot that impacts not only county voters, but city voters. What are we doing to ensure that the city has representation on that board? And these are just issues that I don't see have been really thought out because they just happened in the shadows for so long. And that is what I mean when I say radical transparency.
No question. And the other thing we're hitting on here, Pavan, getting back to your particular race, is that I made an offhanded reference that I'm not a very good lawyer. And while I didn't mean it exactly that way, you understand, I know because you've been studying it, that the probate court judge a lot of what they do is administrative. I mean, it is, you know, mental health issues and adoption issues, and it is the parks, the county parks board, and it, you know, there are a lot of things about it that make it a little bit different than what people think of as a civil criminal common pleas judge in Hamilton County.
Yeah,
and there's only one in Hamilton County.
There's only one. I think you need the skills to be a good judge. You need the temperament to be a good judge and to look very evenly at an issue that comes in front of you and really analyze it. But you also need the leadership skills to run an organization of almost 40 people. You also need the administrative skills to run an organization of 5 magistrates, and with this wide breadth of jurisdiction and running your own clerk's office. I mean, those are additional skills that someone needs to have that I'm not sure that you get simply by being a prosecutor and then becoming a municipal court judge and then becoming a common pleas judge. I think that's why it requires someone who has the breadth of experience that I'm trying to bring to this office, that has worked in government, that has worked outside of government, that has worked in different levels of government, in the military. I think that's why that's important, and someone who's really willing to step up and accept responsibility.
Pavan, I think it gets back to what you said. You know, you do things the same way for 100 years, and you know, it's just time to take fresh looks at some things that have institutionally gone a certain way for years and years. And in my view, probate court, I know you have limits to how political you can be, but in my view, probate court is one of the areas where a fresh look would be helpful.
Yeah, and in order to have that fresh look, you've got to have people who are willing to work to help your candidacy. That means people who are willing to pass out literature, make calls, send out letters and emails to their friends and family, and of course, making contributions to your campaign and going to pavanforjudge.com and making a contribution of up to $600. Right? That's the limit. $600.
Well, I very much appreciate that. We've got only about 10 minutes left, and I know we've got one question that's come in. So if anybody else has a question, please submit it through the Q&A button on Zoom. We're also on Facebook Live, and so please just submit that in the comment section. But I've got one last question before we get to the questions that we've got, especially considering both of your backgrounds and what we're going through as a community and country these last couple months. There seems to be a real reckoning with race, with racism, with aggressive policing that many communities in our country have been able to avoid for a long time. When Ferguson happened 6 years ago, I was actually on my way to South Korea with the Army. And I remember turning on the TV when I got there and seeing what was happening outside of St. Louis, where I went to law school. And I remember immediately being struck and in my head going, this is what happened to us just a few years earlier. Now, Charlie, you were mayor of Cincinnati in 2001. And so I just wanted to, at this time where it sounds like our entire country has really taken a moment to pause and reflect about the experience, quite frankly, of being African-American in this country. Charlie, you were the mayor in 2001 when Timothy Thomas was killed and when a period of civil unrest erupted in this city. So I was just curious, your general perceptions about what we're going through now, the lessons that we should have learned from 2001, maybe the lessons that we didn't learn, and how we move forward at this point. And then Eric, the same question to you.
Well, Pavan, it was a strange and difficult time, and every time I think about this subject, and I go back to, let's say, 01, or even go back to longer than that, in the 60s, when people took to the streets for change, and every time you think you're making some progress, you realize that the problem is deeper than you thought. And as when I would be in conversations with people who are African American in that 2001 era, a lot of times the conversation would get to a point and they would say, yes, but you're not African American and you don't understand. And that is true. And I will admit to you that I have learned that the problems are deeper, more systemic, and not just, you can't fix it just on the surface by tweaking stuff. I think we did good things in 01, 02, 03, 04, and I think hopefully some people look back on it and think we made some progress, but I would be lying if I said we solved anything. I mean, as a permanent solution to anything. And Eric, you remember it. I know Jim Michelle was involved in media, and I don't know what your take on it all was or is today.
Well, I think we're at an interesting point in our country where more people are recognizing kind of the experience that African Americans have had in this country and in certain circumstances. Timothy Thomas was a terrible incident and a really tragedy, and hopefully like things that came out of it, like the Cannes Commission and the collaborative agreement and the MBA that's at the regional chamber are some lasting things that are positive that will make change and hopefully avoid something like that ever happening again. But I think as a country, what we need now are people who are conscious and who are aware, or to use the term woke, which I'm too old to use that term, but I will anyway, and people who are open to new ideas and new experiences. And I think there needs to be a change at the courthouse. And I think there needs to be a change at other county offices because it's a new day. And I think that this is a clear dividing line. This pandemic, the George Floyd murder, all of those, I think, are creating a certain break or a certain change, and the country is moving in a new direction. And I think, quite frankly, Pavan, you're part of that new direction.
Well, I mean, look, I hope to be. I think that we desperately need change. I think we desperately need people that practice empathy, that practice what you talked about when we started this conversation, listening to what communities are saying are problems, and not prejudging any situation based upon only my personal experience, understanding that I don't have all sides of any given story. One of the things that I've been struck by when I look at the protests over the course of the last couple months is the diversity of the people that are in these groups. I mean, it is young, it is old, it is of all races, genders. I mean, it is incredible to see the level of diversity of people that have not only recognized that there's an issue, but have demonstrated they are willing to go to the streets and protest for this. And to me, that's encouraging, because I think that that is something that may have been missed in the past, that too many times the issue really did break down upon racial lines. And so with that, I think I'm somewhat hopeful that maybe we are finally at an inflection point, at a change. And I hope that people can carry that energy through and, look, focus on local offices. We'll kind of end this conversation in the next couple minutes, but I firmly believe that local offices is where not all, but the vast majority of the governing that's going to affect your daily life is going to happen. At the probate court, for example, we talked about it, adoptions, mental health determinations, that's in the jurisdiction of the court. Marriage licenses, that's in the jurisdiction of the court. We did an event earlier this summer with Jim Obergefell and talking about what his experience was like when all he wanted to do was get his husband's name added to the death certificate, and how this set off a chain of reaction of events that took them all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And now we finally have marriage equality as the law of the land. This is a court that everyone is going to be affected by. Unfortunately, somebody you care about is going to pass, and you're going to have to deal with what happens to that estate. So this is a place that everyone's going to find themselves in front of at some point in time. And so we need to make sure that we make it accessible to everybody. We need to make sure that people have access to the education they need to understand why it's important to have a will, why it's important to have a living will. We need to make sure that high school students understand why it's important when you turn 18 to have some of your paperwork taken care of, because you don't want to find out that your parents may not have all the rights to the information that you think they do. We need to make sure that when a child is born, the parents are given information about why you need a will, because this is how you determine who will be able to be the guardian of your child if something were to happen to you. We need to go into communities that don't have what are considered a traditional nuclear family, because while you may perceive someone as your husband or wife, the law may not see them that way. And they may have very limited rights unless you put it down on paper. And so I think there's a really great opportunity here to get out in the community to educate people as to why this is really important for them to pay attention to, and how it can save them money, and it can save their families from being torn apart.
Mm-hmm. I know. I'm just going to add this, Pavan, and that is, can you imagine someone that is more in need of compassion and transparency and assistance than somebody who's indigent with a serious mental health problem that comes into that court? I mean, we're focusing more, thank God, on people who kind of fall not only between the cracks but down, and some of the folks that we're talking about serving in the probate court need that compassion, and need that support. And it would be so easy to just kind of ignore this, and it needs somebody like you who really believes that helping people should be at the foundation of public service.
Well, yeah, definitely. Thank you for that, Charlie. We've got a couple minutes left. We have one question, so I just want to make sure that we get this asked as we're getting ready to wrap up here in the next couple of minutes. The question is, let's just say you two individually, you're both attorneys, you both have a long history of public service. What are the key issues that voters should look at as they look towards voting for judges, looking at the judicial slate?
Well, I would, well, Charlie, you've run for judge, so you go.
I mean, look, I think we've been talking about it, and hopefully, first of all, I think that the electorate needs to pay more attention to it. I mean, that it's a two-way street here. I think the candidates that I have seen, and Eric referenced this, the candidates that I had seen running for judge, particularly on the Democratic side this election, are, as you mentioned, Pavan, it used to be, can we get somebody who served a minimum time to throw a name on the ballot? And I think these people that are running this year particularly are of a very high quality. And I think that means that they care about the kinds of issues we're talking about. They care about the kind of people who may not have the big lawyer or the big expense account, but they just care about the people who will come into the judicial process and may be kind of at the mercy of it in many, many ways. And that's, Eric, I don't know.
Well, I would say that people should look at the background of the person, see if they have a temperament or a life experience that is conducive or allows them to be a judge or to determine someone's fate or circumstances, as it were. And then I would ask people to think about change and diversity and providing opportunities for people who may not have had a chance before. And let's get some new blood and some new energy on the bench. And let's try something that is fresher and more contemporary. So all those factors I would encourage people to look through and examine and take the time, as Charlie just said, to educate yourself about the candidates The League of Women Voters puts out information, but there are other places to look. And I think I have to mention this. Gwen McFarland, who has done a great job of assembling Democratic candidates to run in each one of the judicial races. So kudos to Gwen.
See, Pavan, he gave a much better answer to that than I did. And
There's a lot of practice, Charlie.
Normally I'm so much better than him, and look at that.
Wait, you want me to buy you lunch?
Well, listen, guys, I mean, just thank you both so much for taking some time out of your evening. I really do appreciate it. I have either known you or known of both of you for so long, and it is incredible to me that I get to count both of you as friends. Growing up in this town, Charlie, like you were the mayor, and then you were on TV, and then you were the mayor again. And so, like, my youth growing up in Cincinnati, you were somebody I looked to as an example of leadership and look, you can, if you want to get involved in governance and you want to make a difference in your community, you can do it. And then getting the chance to actually work with you, Eric, as your attorney at the State House for those 4 years was an incredible experience. And the idea that I can count both of you as friends is incredibly humbling. I'm so lucky. And just thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening tonight.
And let's don't forget why we're here. I don't know your website offhand, but you're allowed to tell the people that, and you can, as I think Eric might have mentioned, you can give up to $600, and that's what I'm going to do. And I hope people will join me. And Pavan has a long, and as Eric mentioned, a long and bright future in this community. And I look forward to being a part of it.
Well, thank you both so much. We've also got opportunities to volunteer. You can do it from your home by making phone calls. You can do it by lit dropping, so you don't actually have to knock on someone's door. We got opportunities every weekend, every day from here on out, and for the last 8 weeks until Election Day. The last thing I'll say is, everyone, please make sure you have a plan to vote. Whether you're going to vote absentee, whether you're going to show up to the Board of Elections early, or whether you're going to vote on Election Day, make sure you have a plan. Make sure 5 or 10 of your friends and family have a plan. Make sure you know how you're going to get there. And please remember to vote for me. Please remember to go to our website to make sure that you can get the information on all the Democratic endorsed judicial candidates, because it will not tell you on the ballot if a judicial candidate is a Democrat or Republican. And while no one judge is going to decide in any given direction based upon what party they are a part of, I think it tells you something as to what someone's judicial philosophy is and where their values are, depending on which political party they have chosen to align themselves with. And so I, again, just want to thank everybody for taking some time tonight to join us. Eric, Charlie, I really do appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you soon. And with that, I will end it. So thank you all so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pavan. Good to see you, Charlie. Take care.